Well, it's 6:31. We're going to get started. I'm glad that you're here tonight. Hope your day has gone well. It is dark outside. My goodness. But the lights are on in here, so I'm glad for that. If you want to, take your Bible, open up to 1 Peter chapter 2. The devotional thought will come from 1 Peter chapter 2 tonight. Before we go our different directions into our classes, got just a few Wednesday nights left in the month of November, and then we will switch quarters and change teachers and some things. The elders and some other folks are meeting tonight about the education plan for next quarter, and I'm excited about that and what we're looking forward to as we start to wind down this year. But we'll go to our classes tonight and have some more good things to learn and do. John, what's our song before the lesson? 659. If you take a songbook, open up to 659 right now. After we pray together, we'll sing 659 and then share a thought from 1 Peter. Let's bow together and pray. God, it is good for us to be here tonight, and I am so grateful for the opportunity that has been made available to us to do that. And more than that, I'm thankful that there are people in this building that have made the decision to gather together, that have brought their families here, that have brought their Bibles with them, that have dedicated themselves to being hungry for righteousness. I ask that you would feed us tonight, that our teachers would be blessed in the lessons they've prepared. I thank you for them and for the work that they do. I know that it is difficult at times to go through everyday activities and to keep up with everything else going on and to still get a Bible lesson ready each and every week to bring to people that need it. And I'm thankful for them, and I ask you to bless them in their lives, bless them for that sacrifice that they make. As we have the chance tonight to be together, I ask you to bless us by showing us how we can be the people that you want us to be. Be that city that's been set on a hill so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us for the many times that we've fallen today. Thank you for picking us back up. Give us the strength to continue standing and trying again tomorrow. And it's in Jesus' name that we offer this prayer. Amen.
As Adam announced, we'll sing 659 momentarily, but if you would mark 885. Let's sing that as the invitation song, How Beautiful Heaven Must Be, 885. Then turn back to 659. I picked this one out, and now all of a sudden I feel my throat going in a coughing spasm, but maybe we'll make it anyway. I love to tell the story. Let's sing verses 1, 3, and 4. There's not a 5. 1, 3, and 5. And let's stand as we sing this one. Sing out on this song. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story because I know it's true. It satisfies my longing as nothing else can do. I love to tell a story, will be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell. And again, let's stop there. I do this on this song every time. Let's try it again. I love to tell a story, 'tis pleasant to repeat. What scenes each time I tell it, more wonderfully sweet.
The better part of valor. There's a phrase about that. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse number 9. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people called for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you're God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And so, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Most of the ladies in the room tonight should recognize those verses. That's what the class downstairs has been working on this past week. Alden's been teaching a class. I'm a little bit jealous of the material that you are getting to experience and work through. I ask Autumn about it. She shows me what y'all are working on, what she's been working on. I'm extremely impressed. Obviously proud of the good work that she does and the time and effort that she spends pulling this material together. And she brought me this thought last week that I wanted to write down and use. This is a quote from William Barclay. In any museum, we find quite ordinary things. I remember when we were in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, we went to the Smithsonian's. And there's a lot of different Smithsonian museums for different things, air and space. There's, Native Americans. There's, all these different kinds of natural history, the museums for different areas. And I remember one of them had props from a lot of TV and movie episodes, like the ruby slippers that, Dorothy wore in Wizard of Oz. Those are at one of the Smithsonian museums. But the idea that there were an awful lot of just everyday things, just things that you might have in your house. A clothes, a walking stick, a pen, books, pieces of furniture. Things that are average and ordinary. They might look almost identical to something that you would have in your house. But they're in a museum. They're on display. People pay money to come look at these ordinary things. And why is that? They are of value only because they were once possessed by some great person. It is so with the Christian. He may be a very ordinary person, but he acquires new value because he belongs to God. Paul talks about in every house there's ordinary things and there's sacred things. There's stuff that you leave in the cabinet that's special and it serves one purpose and one purpose only, and so you never bring it down and you never get it out. And then there's stuff that you use every day. There's the welcome mat and there's the the other things that you use and they get worn out and they're just average things. But if they're in God's house, they're all significant. And tonight, I don't know how we think and view ourselves. I don't know if we wanted to, do the exercise where we, talk about what item would you be? What vessel would you be if you were a household item? On the mat, because everybody walks all over me. Something goofy like that. But the fact that we are possessed by a great God means that even ordinary things are no longer ordinary. And we have a value. We become special because of who possesses us. And tonight we should use that when we look in the mirror. We should consider that when we go out into the world. When others are trying to tear us down, when other things and other people try to make us feel secondary or less than, to be reminded of what God thinks of us. And because we are His, we now become, even as ordinary things, priceless. You are priceless tonight. And if you're not treating yourself as such, then I think you need to re-examine your approach. If we can help you do that tonight in any way, come forward while we stand together and while we sing.
Good evening. Good to see everyone. Hope you've picked up an opportunity worksheet. If you haven't, please get one, and don't forget Veterans Day tomorrow. I had the honor of going to the Veterans Day program at Central today, and when they sing the song to honor each different branch, if that don't bring a tear or a chill to you, I don't know what will. How many veterans have we got here tonight? If you would stand. We've got several. We thank you. We appreciate what you do and what you did in serving our country. Thank you so much. Several things I want to remind you of. If you've got a pumpkin and want to get rid of it, tonight's the night. Jimmy's Dodge pickup is parked right out here in that first row. Put it in the bed of it. I know we appreciate that. Remind you ladies of the Ladies Summit t-shirts. You need to be signing up for that if you haven't already. Several things we're helping with. Glenwood Adoption will be in not Sunday, but the next. Also, Safe Place Family Holiday Adoption. If you can help with a mom and 3 kids, see Caitlin Richardson. She's got the information for that family. Hams for Underwood, monetary donations for fruit baskets, all those different things. So if you can help with those or have already helped, we thank you for that. Continue to remember the Lauderdale family in our prayers, the passing of Phyllis's brother down in Jacksonville, Florida. Also, we want to remember the Rickard family. This would have been Linda Rickard's brother-in-law. It would have been Judy Myrick's uncle. I want to remember this family. I want to remember Judy Patterson. Judy Patterson is going to Birmingham tomorrow to see a specialist. She's having some issues breathing. So please remember Judy in your prayers. Send her a note of encouragement, and we hope and pray everything goes well. Continue to remember Sue Beal, Michelle Bernstein, Paul Dodd, Gloria Danley, Dwayne Fulmer, Jim Lancaster, Cherie Lavender, Gene McDaniel, Jerry Montgomery, Vicki Morris, Don Pollard, Linda Rickard, Virginia West. Are there others that we need to remember? Anyone else we need to add to our list? Well, be sure and keep these in your prayers. A couple of our members have moved to a different address, Beth Harrison, and also Sherry Winters and Heather Winters, so please make note of that on here too. The Jacksonburg congregation is having Homecoming Sunday by Travis Creasy. And they'll be having an afternoon service also at 1:30 if you'd like to go to that. Anyone have any other announcements before we dismiss to go to class? Nothing else? Let's be dismissed at this time.
I apologize for a little problem I've got. I've got sinuses that are giving me a fit here the last couple of weeks, and the drainage just keeps coming. So anyway, I had to run to the car to get some breath mints and maybe calm that down. Glad you're here. And we're still looking at David. We'll have 2 more lessons after tonight on David. And want to look at some things about adversity that was in his life. I have no idea about what goes through a king's mind. There are some things that I read about David and about Solomon and about Saul and about other kings in Israel that make me wonder what they thought and why they thought those things. And we'll look at a couple of things tonight in David's life that sometimes makes us wonder what was going on in all of the whole realm of it. But anyway, adversity happens to a lot of folks that are in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And we consider those folks to be not only God's people, but heroes of the faith. And there, a good number of them are mentioned in the 11th chapter of Hebrews as being those heroes of faith. But I guess when somebody mentions adversity and bad things and good things turning sour quickly, I think Jesus Christ is probably our biggest example of that in the whole Bible. You know, on Sunday of the last week of the Passion Week, he enters the city of Jerusalem to fame and glory, and folks praising him and riding on a donkey, which is in that day and time in Israel, the kings rode donkeys. If you go back to David's time, David rode a donkey. His son Absalom rode a mule. They didn't talk about horses. In fact, he gets at one point, I think, somewhere around 2,000 horses, and he only keeps 100 of them. And the rest of them he hobbles so that they can't be used again as a horse would be used against him in combat. But the Christ rides into the city of Jerusalem to the praise of those there on a donkey. And they were singing hallelujahs to him. He's arrested on Thursday night in the Garden of Gethsemane on Mount Olive. And from that point till the afternoon of Friday, he's tried, and he's tried, and thank you, appreciate it. He's tried at two different places. He's taken to two different folks that were claiming or had swapped the office of the high priest between them and paid money out of the temple treasury to the Roman to be declared the high priest. Caiaphas was one of those people. And he's tried, and he's taken out on Friday afternoon and crucified. They had to have him off the cross before sundown on Friday because the Sabbath, the holy day, started at 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon and went until 6 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. And so he's crucified, and he's buried in a borrowed tomb, and he arises on Sunday, the third day. Doesn't get much worse than that or more adversarial from people than for their loyalties to change that quick. And I often wonder how many of the 3,000 were baptized on the first Pentecost after the resurrection, after the preaching of the apostles. How many of those were standing in that courtyard and talking to Pilate to crucify him and hollering to Pilate, crucify, crucify. And even the apostles, the only one that was with him for the whole time, from the time he's arrested and taken to Caiaphas and till the time that he's crucified and on the cross, the only one that was with him the whole time was John. And so, who are the true? And who are the good friends? And who are those who look after him? We're most fortunate. I often wonder, and maybe my mind goes crazy on me, but I often wonder if I never heard a preacher preach, if I never I went to a gospel meeting in my life, and all I had was the Bible, how long would it take me to come to the conclusion that the church is true, that Jesus is the Savior? Where would I start and what would I do? And when you start reading it, how long does it take to get to the commandments? How long does it take to get to the temple and the temple worship? And then how long does it take to get from that to Jesus Christ? As we look at when the temple's built, it's built in the 960 time frame by Solomon, 960 BC. So that's 3,000 years ago, basically, that the temple was first built. And what would I do with all the information that's in the Bible if I didn't have some commentary to read, or I didn't have somebody to preach and somebody to teach? And so, where would I be? And so I think that's what makes it important to us. You know, David had, I guess the thing that really gets to me is the guy named Absalom. Absalom is his son, and he's one of the 6 sons that were born in Hebron when he was first declared and anointed king over Judah. There were 6 sons born in Hebron, and Absalom is one of those 6. And that son had a sister named Tamar, and she was raped by one of the half-brothers of Absalom, Amnon. And Absalom spends 2 years with that on his mind, and that's all he can think about. He takes his sister in and keeps her in his family. And he has Amnon on his mind. And finally, after 2 years, he goes with his dad and asks his dad to let the brothers, all of David's sons, 17 of them, come to a sheep shearing over on the border of Ephraim. And David doesn't go, and he really doesn't want the sons to go, but he finally acquiesces and lets them go to Absalom and his sheep shearing. And what happens at the sheep shearing? The only reason he had the sheep shearing and invited the boys there was to kill Amnon. And so he has Amnon killed there. And he doesn't go back to Jerusalem, okay? Now, if you go back to the Old Testament, what's the punishment that should have been awarded to Absalom for murdering his brother? Death. Death. He should have been taken out and stoned. And he wasn't. But he flees to Gersha, which is up in the northeast of the Sea of Galilee. It's in the area just north of where the tribe of Gad was. They had a portion up in that part of the country. And that's east of the Jordan River, east of the Sea of Galilee. It's east of where Capernaum was. Now remember, that's where Christ goes after the folks in Nazareth want to kill him. Jesus goes to Capernaum, which is on the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee. But anyway, that's where Absalom goes. And he spends 3 years with Talmai, the king, who is his mother's father. And so he goes and spends 3 years with his grandfather, trying to get away from being killed. Joab goes and talks with him and goes back to David and gets him to acquiesce on the killing of Absalom. That he won't put him up before the Sanhedrin, he won't declare that he needs to be killed, which should have happened. But anyway, so he comes back to Jerusalem and then goes to Hebron. And when he goes down there, what he says to David for the reason for going, it says, I made a vow in Gersha. And I made that vow to God, and I need to go to Hebron to complete the sacrifice for the vow. And he goes down there. And when he gets down there, he has already arranged for people in all of the tribes in all of the cities to, when they hear the horn blow in Hebron, that they blow horns all over the country, and he is anointed king in place of his dad. Wow. He leads a rebellion against David. And he leaves Hebron, and when David finds out he's left Hebron, headed towards Jerusalem, David flees Jerusalem because the army isn't organized at that point and in the city of Jerusalem and ready to defend. And that's the only reason I can figure for him leaving, is that he couldn't get the army together fast enough to defeat Absalom when he gets there, shows up at Jerusalem from Hebron, which from Hebron to Jerusalem is not but about 40 miles maximum. So David flees from Jerusalem. And he tell you the 600 men that had joined him at the cave of Adullam and in Ziklag are those that leave Jerusalem with him. And he, the way he leaves Jerusalem is that he goes across the Kidron Valley and the stream of Kidron and goes up Mount Olive. And that's where he starts some defensive work as far as what he's going to do about this rebellion that his son has taken on him. You know, Absalom had spent some time in that 2-year period. He had spent some time at the gates of the city of Jerusalem when folks were coming to see David about settling some civil justices for them. And he'd asked them what their problem was, and he said, "I saw the problem in your favor." And so he was gaining popularity by telling the people what they wanted to hear. And in fact, he talked some of one of David's prime counselors into leaving David and coming to him. And that counselor was Ahithophel. And he was a very dependable counselor for David all of the time that David was fighting the Philistine, and some of the time while he's fighting with Saul. Those 600 men were dedicated to him, and they'd come to him in Abdullah and gone down to Ziklag with him, and were with him and when he went after the folks that had gone into Ziklag and captured the wives and children and all of the goods of David and his men. They go with him and get their wives and children back and help David. I guess I have difficulty with Absalom, okay? I'll just be truthful about it. Your dad is the king, right? He is, and you're taken care of for the rest of your life. You're in his court. You are part of his administration. You won't be out of a job until David dies. And you might still have a job if one of David's sons is anointed king. We know that's going to happen. Solomon's going to be the next king. He's going to be anointed in 960. He's going to reign another 40 years. So we're going to get down to 920, roughly, of Solomon, and then the divided kingdom comes up. But all of those 17 boys are going to be taken care of. All right? You'd think. But anyway, he evidently thinks he needs to be king. And at one point, he gets 50 men to run in front of him and then has some chariots that run in front of him wherever he goes. He's taken on the appearance of royalty. that simple, with folks running in front and to defend him and those that are in the chariots. So Absalom is a adversary, and can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. I don't know if, I'm pretty sure just about everybody in this room is the same way. Can't imagine having a son that turns on you that strongly after he has taken care of you. Now, at this point in time, when he goes after the kingship, my assumption in that is that it's somewhere in the 30th to 40th year, that 10-year block. It's somewhere in that 10-year block of David's kingship that he's doing this. So he's been taken care of since his birth in Hebron. He can do whatever David wants him to do. And if you notice that when we start talking about the army and who commands the army and who takes it out to battle, it's not Absalom. It's not one of the sons, not one of the 17. Not a single one of those guys are trained in warfare as David is trained in warfare. And none of them command any portion of the army of Israel or Judah. Who does? Joab and Abiathar and Ahishai. And so I just, I have a difficulty with that. I really do. I love my son dearly, okay? Betty and I have 2 children. We've got a daughter that's here, teaches school at Forest Hills and teaches kindergarten. And think the world of her and the 4 granddaughters she's provided us with. Our son lives in Helena, Montana. He's GS-14 in the EPA out there, and he's closing old mines out there, and I can't imagine him doing Betty and I that way. But anyway, Absalom does. He's got a streak in him that is a pretty good sized ego streak, and so anyway. There's another fellow that shows up in that time frame. In fact, the next day, after this man shows up in Jerusalem for David, there's a guy named Ittai, and he's a Philistine from Gath, and he knows him. He knows David. He has to know him. David was down there. Number one, he was in Gath for a while and then Ziklag. And David had taken, and finally they had turned David down as far as going to the Philistine to defeat Saul. But so Ittai knows David. And he comes and joins forces with David. And the next day, Absalom starts his rebellion. And David tells this guy, he says, you can take your army and you can go home. You don't have to stay. You just showed up yesterday. And he says, I'll be with you until death parts us. And so he stays with David. And he is put in charge of one of the, David takes his army and divides it into thirds. And Ittai gets 1/3, and the rest are parceled out like they always were. And he stays with him until after the defeat of Absalom. There are 2 more guys, priests, that are David's close allies that are in the camp, and they leave Jerusalem with him. Zadok and Abiathar leave, and David, when he gets, I guess it was out at the Mount of Olives, or just prior to getting to the top of the Mount of Olives, he sends them back to Jerusalem. And both of those guys have a son that go back to Jerusalem with them. And he says, when you get some information on what's going on with Absalom, you send one of your sons back and let him tell us what's fixing to happen or what he's fixing to do. Oh, spies in the camp is the way I call it. These two guys are spies. And they take the Ark of the Covenant and go back to Jerusalem with that ark and take it back to Mount Moriah where the tabernacle is. Remember, the tabernacle was set up by David on Mount Moriah, the threshing floor of a fellow that he had to buy it from. And they set the tabernacle up there, and the Ark of the Covenant was in it. David wanted to build the temple, but God told him he couldn't. He had too much blood on his hands, and so he wouldn't let him build the temple. Told him to get it ready for Solomon to do that. So when they get that information, they start bringing it back to David, what's fixing to happen. And I don't have an answer in my looking at maps and all that stuff to figure out why David goes across Jordan and he goes up into the area of what shows up in the New Testament time as Bashan. And he goes to a city up there that was named by Jacob. It had to be named by Jacob when he comes from Haran with the the two wives that he had got from Laban, and who was his uncle. He had married two of his cousins, Rachel and Leah, and he had been working for Laban for both of those women, and he wound up getting a big flock of everything, camels, sheep, everything, goats, all of that. And he's on the way south, I think, at that point in time, with that army, that stuff that he has and his two wives, and he stops there in this town, and he names it. He also goes across, no, we're still talking about Jacob. He goes across the Jordan River, and he had to cross it somewhere in about the middle of it, and between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And he winds up, there's a well named Jacob's Well. Remember, that's where Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman. It was at the Jacob's Well. And it's in the area where Mount Gilboa and Mount Tabor are. And so he must have come down to this area of Bashan and crossed the Jordan River going over to Mount Tabor and in that area. So when he dug the well there, David takes another fellow named Hushai, and he sends him to Absalom in Jerusalem, because Ahithophel has defected from David and gone to Absalom. And he was a good counselor, was an excellent counselor during the time with David. And he would have been a good one, but David sends this other guy to confound or go against what Ahithophel tells Absalom to do. And then he asks God to make the counsel of Ahithophel to Absalom sound like foolishness. And so once Absalom crosses the Jordan River going to the east, and he's somewhere south of where David and his people are, Absalom asked Ahithophel to tell him what to do. And he says, I tell you what, why don't you let me take 12,000 men and go and get David? I'll take care of it. Well, Hushai confounds that doctrine, or that thing. And so he asked him, he says, what do you think? He says, David is a mighty warrior. And he was. David was a mighty warrior. And if you go back to starting with Goliath and when he goes out and leads the army for Saul, he is a mighty warrior. And so he has defeated Saul. He has defeated the Philistine 2 or 3 times. And so he's a mighty warrior. And so Hushai tells Absalom, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to tell Absalom to go now to David? David won't be with that army. And sure enough, David wasn't with that army. They told him, stay home. Don't come with us. Because he was getting old. You know, when he had been the king for nearly 40 years at this point. And he's somewhere in the late 60s at this point in time. And, you know, another rabbit, okay? We normally let folks off active duty in our military, whether it be Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, whoever, Marines. Normally, they serve 30 years and go home as the max. Some folks are invited to stay for 35, 40 years. And we had some generals do that. And you know, the 5 stars, we only had 5 of them in World War II, five stars. And one of them stayed. I was on active duty for a good while before he was out at Fort Bliss, Texas. And very smart fellow. But anyway, most folks, you can retire at 20, 30, and then some are invited to stay a little longer. David is getting up, and when we start looking at ages, you know, I went on active duty at 24, and I got off active duty at 47, and I wasn't, you know, one of the reasons I got out of the Army at that point in time, I was 47 years old, and I had to run 2 miles faster when I was 47 than I had to when I was 24. And I got tired of calling to get something done, and they'd say, he's at the gym. No, he wasn't at the gym. He'd gone by the gym on the way home. So, you know, it was tough to get things done, and it was time to leave. And so I retired. But David is at that point. There's a couple of places where his men kill more of Goliath's kinfolks, one of his brothers. And these giants are from down in the area of Gath and Philistia. Anyway, when Hushai goes to Jerusalem, there's another enemy or spy in the camp of Absalom. And so he gets the word about what Absalom is fixing to do, and knows where he's going. There's another fellow that we need to talk about for just a minute, 2 or 3 of them, matter of fact. There's a fellow named Ziba, which we talked about before, when David was looking for a descendant of Saul to take care of. Ziba comes to him and says, I know one. It's Jonathan's son. His name is Mephibosheth. And I may be mispronouncing that, but that's the way it looks to me in the Old Testament. Anyway, I have a little trouble with those names. But anyway, this guy brings Mephibosheth to David, and David takes care of him at his table for the rest of his life. He takes Ziba and his 15 sons and his 30 servants and tells them to go take care of Saul's property for Mephibosheth. And so this guy, Ziba, stays in touch with David all the time. So he tells Mephibosheth, I'm going to go get 2 donkeys. I'll saddle them and we'll go to David. Well, he gets 2 donkeys and he puts bread and stuff to eat on them, and he takes them to David, but he doesn't take Mephibosheth. And when he gets to David, he tells David that Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, stayed back in Jerusalem to reestablish the reign of Saul's family. It wasn't true. He left him there and went to feed David. And so he feeds David, and he gives him those 2 donkeys for him and his family to ride on while they're in this fleeing mode. Later on, Mephibosheth shows up. And David asked him, why didn't you come? He said, because I'm crippled. And Ziba went to get the donkeys and saddled them and was going to come and get me, but he never came back. So who do you believe if you're David? And what do you do? He split the property up at that last information that he got and gave half to each one of them. On the way out of town, there's a guy named Shimei, and he's upset. He don't like David. Okay, he don't like David. And on the way out, and I assume it's on the road in the Kidron, or on the other side of Mount Olive, on the way down to cross the Jordan. He's there and he's cursing David, and he's throwing rocks at him and calling him a murderer and a bloody man. And the town that he's from is not far from Mount Olive, and is not far from the Jordan. I guess the big city we remember that being down in that area when you leave Jerusalem and going east, the big town that we remember is Jericho. And I can't find this particular town on the map. But when David returns after Absalom is defeated and dead, when he returns, Shimei meets him at the Jordan River and meets him with 1,000 men and asks for his forgiveness and declares his loyalty to him, and David forgives him and lets him stay. Abishai wants to kill Shimei when he's doing that cursing and throwing the rocks and all that stuff, and David said, no, we're not going to do that. Pretty good reasons for doing that. The guy's not going to kill him. He might hurt him with a rock, but he's not going to kill him. And it's only one man, if I understand it correctly. And David has a bigger problem. He's got a son that wants to kill him and is set out to do so. So I got a son waiting to kill me, and you want me to kill this guy for throwing a rock? I don't think so. Pretty smart, isn't it? Yeah. He sends Hushai, as we talked about a little bit ago, and he convinces Absalom that he has given up on David. He switched loyalty to him, and so Ahithophel asked Absalom to give him 12,000 men, and he'll go take care of David, of Absalom. And then Hushai tells him that, no, David's a mighty man, and you don't want to do that. You want to wait and get all your army together, and then you lead your troops. Well, what's that? That's an ego trip for Absalom, isn't it? Because his daddy's a mighty warrior. And if he defeats him, he's going to be a mighty warrior in the sight of the troops and in the sight of all of Israel. The 10 tribes in the north and the 2 down south in Judah, in that area. So ego gets the better of Absalom, and he decides not to let Ahithophel do that. And so that guy goes and hangs himself. Because his counsel isn't being accepted by Absalom. He has already made a bad mistake and gone to him. And if David wins, he's dead anyway. And if Absalom don't win, he's dead. And if Absalom does win, what's he going to do to him? Because there's 2 of them that's arguing, and their advice is different. And whose did he take? He took Hushai's. And so Ahithophel is in bad shape. Like I said, David and the people arrive at a town called Mahanaim. Mahanaim. And so you can pronounce it your way. But anyway, it's the city that Jacob named on the way back from Haran and Laban. And so it's about 65 miles from Jerusalem. That's a pretty good trip to make in that day and time. I don't want to walk 65 miles anywhere. I don't walk 2 miles anymore. The day that I retired from the Army was the last time I ran. And my answer to that is, he'll just have to whip me if I can't talk him out of it. And so I'm not running. It's not that I'm brave. It's just that I'm not going to run. I've had enough of running in my life. Anyway, there's an old fellow that meets David with food and drink in that town. His name is Barzillai. And he leads him back from that town after Absalom is dead, back to the Jordan River. And David says, please come and go with me, and I will keep you up for the rest of your life. Well, the guy's 80 years old. How long is that going to be? I don't know. Not long, because most people in that day and time didn't live much past 50. So he's had a long life at that point, and he said, no, I want to die in my town. Was that number 2? Hello? I didn't finish tonight. We'll finish next week. Thank you.